Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brachear Pashman. This week marked 300 days of captivity for the 115 remaining hostages kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. There was also a major development: confirmation that an operation in July led to the death of Hamas's military leader Muhammad Deif. But there were two more assassinations this week, the leaders of two terror groups targeting Israel. On Wednesday, we learned that Hamas terror leader Ismail Haniyeh was killed in an explosion in Tehran shortly after meeting with Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Haniyeh had been in Tehran for the inauguration of its new president. This just a day after top Hezbollah leader Fuad Shukr was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Beirut in retaliation for the horrific rocket attack that killed 12 children on a soccer field in Golan Heights. AJC Jerusalem Director Avital Leibovich is with us now to discuss these developments. Avital, welcome back to People of the Pod.
Thank you, Manya. Good to be here.
So, Avital, my first question is, are we safer now than we were at the start of the week? Do two fewer terror leaders lead to less terror?
Well, I would say the world in general is a safer place with the absence of Shuker and Haniyeh. However, the neighborhood here is not changing. And unfortunately, we are still surrounded by vicious enemies who still are seeking to see our erosion and eradication. So while I'm very happy with the outcome in the last 24 hours, I also know there's still a lot of reason for concern.
So tell us about these terror leaders. Who was Ismael Haniyeh, and what was his role with Hamas?
Sure. So Ismail Haniyeh, he is also, by the way, has another name, which is Abu el-Abed. He actually served as the number one political leader of Hamas since May 2017. He actually substituted in this role Khaled Mashal, another terrorist. And before that, he actually served as the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority just for a very brief short time between 2006 and 2007. And he actually became very close to a Hamas leader called Ahmad Yassin. And basically, he really grew into the very radical agenda of Hamas. Interesting enough, his background was totally different. I mean, he even worked in Israel, in the city closest to Gaza called Ashkelon. So he knows the country, he knows the mentality. So in addition to this, he also began to do some terror activity after the 3 years of working in Ashkelon in Israel. And then he initiated different kinds of activities. Among them was the kidnapping of Gilad Shalit, the soldier who we all remember. And after being involved in the terror realm and the political realm, he decided to focus more on Hamas's agenda, on Hamas's charter. And basically, what we have seen in the last couple of years are a few things. Number one, Haniyeh got very rich because he received millions and millions of dollars from the Qataris. Number two, he left Gaza and he spent the last years of his life in Qatar, in lavish hotels and apartments, enjoying great life. And this is also an indication of how much does he care about the people of Gaza. And I want to connect to the current war and give you a quote of who Haniyeh was, because I see that some of the media outlets have the nerve to call him a moderate negotiator. Therefore, I'd like to help them and share with you the following quote, which was said on October 27. That was the first day where the IDF entered Gaza following the October 7 massacre. So he said, "We need the blood of women, children, and the elderly of Gaza, so it awakens our revolutionary spirit." This is the moderate guy that international media is referring to in their reports. He was a radical, he was a terrorist, and we had a very good opening of our day this morning when we heard the news.
And Fuad Shukr, what was his role with Hezbollah?
He also, this is a name which is not known, I think, to many people, but he does have a French connection and an American connection, of course, an Israeli connection. The guy was number 2 in the level of seniority in Hezbollah. He was actually the manager of the army, in a way, of the Hezbollah military apparatus. But more than that, he was a strategist and he knew what direction should Hezbollah take in the next years. He was in charge of developing the entire missile industry that Hezbollah had, including the accurate missiles. In other words, he was a strategist, but he also was a practical man. Now, here is the connection that he had to the US and to France. In 1983, he was one of the orchestrators of the attack in the Marine base in Beirut. In that terrible day, 241 American Marines lost their lives, but 70 French soldiers were killed as well. So, as you can imagine, this terrorist, Fuad Shukr, has 40 years of terror activities, primarily against Israel, but also against Israeli allies. So, again, I think it was a very courageous and accurate Israeli operation. And more than anything, Manya, it shows the amazing level of intelligence, where that person was exactly, in which room, in which building, in which floor, and to be able to very surgically act in the right time, at the right moment, and target him. I think that shows a lot for the Israeli intelligence capabilities.
Was Haniyeh part of the ceasefire and hostage release negotiations?
So, if you look at the title that Haniyeh had, which is the head of the political branch of Hamas, you could think that he had some impact on the decision-making process with the hostages deals. But I can tell you that he had really no impact, very little impact, because from the analysis that we have here in Israel, the main decision maker is Sinwar. Now, the question is, will the death of Haniyeh have an impact, number 1, on Sinwar, and therefore, number 2, on the hostage deal? Now, I'm not sure it will have an effect, I have to say. Sinwar is known as the longtime rival of Haniyeh. So, in other words, he will not be mourning his death, but he had the last word with regard to any of the discussions on the hostages. And at the end of the day, Sinwar said numerous times that he is willing to die. And his ultimate goal is to make sure that Hamas has some sort of a control in Gaza. He understands today, Sinwar, that Hamas will no longer control the government. Therefore, he is willing to compromise. For example, let's say Hamas will be giving a role of being in charge of the renovations in Gaza. Or perhaps they will be in charge of the education system and so on. In other words, just to have some sort of a stronghold inside Gaza in terms of governance of some sort. Now, if that will not be a part of any possible deal, then Sinwar has no interest to give a positive answer to a deal.
I am curious, though, why Haniyeh would have met with Ayatollah Ali Khamenei before his death.
Hamas and Iran have different kinds of cooperation. We have seen that across the region. In other words, we have seen Hamas representatives in Lebanon working alongside Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, but also meeting the Iranian foreign minister when he came to Lebanon for visits. We understand that this time around, there is a clear interest, which Iran supports, is to target Israel as much as possible. And obviously, Iran prefers a proxy like Hamas to be a representative of its own goals and intentions. And therefore, you saw Haniyeh, the last time was last night, paying respects for the inauguration ceremony in Iran. And according to what I'm hearing, he was also hosted in a Revolutionary Guards facility. In other words, whoever targeted Haniyeh had a great level of intelligence by knowing how to get to that specific building. But moreover, this is a very secure area because the Revolutionary Guards are considered the body which is the most guarded of all bodies in Iran. They're the ones controlling the budget of the Iranian government. They're the ones operating Hezbollah and other militias and proxies. So, in other words, the fact that it was a Revolutionary Guards headquarters and Haniyeh was there, and despite of all this information, the security system around him cracked, I think that sent a very loud and clear message to the Iranians.
How is the relationship between Iran and Hamas and the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah different? Can you explain that to our audience?
First of all, I mean, Iran is the chief orchestrator of everything that we have been seeing here since October 7th, but actually before that as well. Now, I would say that with Hezbollah, it's a long love story between the two. Actually, Hezbollah was founded by Iran quite shortly after the revolution in 79, when the country became a fundamentalist, Islamist, and obviously took the wrong path, distancing itself from the Western world. Iran actually built Hezbollah, founded Hezbollah, first the military wing, and then adding 3 years later the political wing. And the idea was to use them in order to attack Israel. And this is very convenient. Think about it. Iran is 1,300 kilometers away from Israel. It's not convenient to fire a rocket all the way from that country to Israel. But let's say you want to use simpler means, and within half an hour to take an operation out, it's easier to use someone who's bordering with Israel. So gradually, we saw Hezbollah taking over almost the entire country, and everything had to do with Iranian funding. Now, in order to have Iranian funding in times of sanctions, Iran and Hezbollah found alternative options like laundering money, like a whole chain of drug trafficking in Syria, in other countries. So they found solutions to do that. By the way, Iran is doing the same thing with the Houthis in Yemen, also using them as a proxy because, this is the most poor country in the region, huge unemployment rates. You can recruit tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people as long as you pay them a very minimal salary. Now, as for Hamas, Hamas was built a little bit later. It's actually an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, so not directly of Iran. However, sometimes there are joint interests between different terror groups. Actually, Iran founded the Islamic Jihad in Gaza in 79, right after the revolution, because it thought this would be the main actor controlling Gaza with the best assets and so on. But with the course of the years, when Hamas controlled Gaza and was able to develop its terror means, rockets, drones, etc., then of course Iran moved to cooperate with Hamas according to its needs. For Iran, it's of course more worthwhile to use the blood of Palestinians than the blood of Iranians, to sacrifice Palestinians and not Iranians. This is how they see it. At the end of the day, Iran wishes to resume to the situation of being a major empire as it used to be, a Persian empire decades and decades ago. So this is the long time dream, I would say. And the proxies are just another, I would say, detail in the path to reach that dream.
Now, Hezbollah did not claim responsibility for the attack that killed a dozen children on a soccer field. Why not? They're usually proud of the death and destruction that they wreak. Why did Israel target the terror group anyway?
Look, I'll say a few words about this tragic event that took place just a few days ago in a very small, beautiful, pastoral village called Majd al-Shams, which, by the way, means the Tower of Sun. It's on the Syrian border, and on the other side, it's on the Lebanese border. And people ask me if this is the first time that Hezbollah ever targeted Druze or targeted Muslims. Now, this specific village was targeted 5 times already by Hezbollah. Saturday, obviously, was the deadliest of all the 5. It was 6:18 in the afternoon, beautiful summer day, lots of kids outside. I visited the soccer field where it happened, and the rocket left really not a chance for those kids who were playing there. although there was actually a shelter right there, maybe 2 feet from where the rocket hit the ground, they really didn't have a chance to make it and go into the shelter. And unfortunately, those poor 12-year-old kids, ages 10 to 16, died in place. We still have over 30 people hospitalized. Many of them are kids as well. And I have to say, Manya, that I saw a village who has been traumatized. People are still wearing black clothes. There are black flags hanging everywhere inside the village. The pictures of the kids are, pasted everywhere on the squares, just on random villages, walls of buildings. I also went to one of the bereaved families. And you sit there with a parent who lost his 12-year-old boy named Johnny, and he tells you about his dreams. And he says to me, these dreams will never be fulfilled. And he says to me, we don't even know how to digest what happened to us. So for Hezbollah, they don't really care who they're firing at, whether it's Jews or Arabs or Muslims or Christians, whoever. They don't care if it's in the Eastern Galilee or the Western Galilee or the Golan. All these areas are relevant for the Hezbollah fire since October 8th.
Well, Hezbollah did not take responsibility. Why not?
So here what is the mistake? Hezbollah actually made a mistake. Hezbollah has a TV station which is its mouthpiece, just like Hamas's TV station mouthpiece is Al Jazeera. Hezbollah's is El Mayadin. Now, immediately after an attack, a Hezbollah attack, El Mayadin immediately publishes responsibility taking by Hezbollah, always, every time. And by the way, we're talking about an average of 8 attacks a day, every day. And that's what they did here too. On Saturday, they immediately took responsibility in the name of Hezbollah. Unfortunately, for them, after 20 minutes, they understood the extent of the mistake they did and deleted, of course, this responsibility. And then they made up their own narrative. The narrative was that a misfiring of an Iron Dome interceptor mistakenly killed the kids, like Israel's fault is that the kids died. Now, this narrative, if you think it was only the social media, then think again. They sent the foreign minister of Lebanon to the media to repeat it, but they also did something more. They sent the head of the Druze community. It's the same blood and flesh of the Druze in the Golan. They sent him to the press to declare that it was not a Hezbollah rocket. So they understood that they will pay a price of some sort. I'm sure they understood that. I'm not sure they understood the extent of the intelligence Israel had. And now, of course, they're threatening to target Israel. I think the next 48 hours will reveal where we're heading.
And you talk about the incredible intelligence that led to the precise explosion in Beirut, as well as the death of Haniyeh. Has Israel taken responsibility for his death, and would it claim credit if it was responsible?
Up to this minute, Israel did not take any responsibility for Haniyeh's death. Of course, yes, for the Hezbollah number 2 guy, Fuad Shukr, but not for Haniyeh. As a matter of fact, the prime minister ordered the cabinet members and the ministers not to speak publicly on the issue. And basically, there has been a lot of quiet from the political echelon here since the morning.
And you touched on what my last question is, and that is, how will this elevate the tensions? Does this raise the chance of a war between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Iran, these assassinations?
So I would say we are already in a war to some extent with Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has fired more than 6,000 rockets since October 8th. And I've counted 43 Israeli casualties since October 8th. So we are talking about an active war in a sense. I think that there is a good reason to believe that both Hezbollah and Iran will react to these two targets. I'm not sure in which way. I do think that Hezbollah still has the notion and the strategy of not completely escalating the situation to a full-scale war. I'm sure that Nasrallah is sitting in his bunker in the Dahya neighborhood, seeing the footage from Gaza and understanding Israel's capability, and does not want to turn Beirut into a similar kind of situation. And he also saw the building last night. He also understood the extent of the intelligence capability. So I think he will have to react in such a way that, on the one hand, he could be proud that he did something, but on the other hand, would not engage in a full scale war. Iran, on the other hand, is a different story because 3 months have passed since April 14th, in which Iran decided to gift us with hundreds of drones and different kinds of ballistic missiles. And from their perspective, it failed. It failed because Israel has a great defense system. It also failed because the US led a great coalition of countries who supported the interception attempts in April 14. However, and this is a big however, Iran learned its lessons. Iran learned why it failed in April. And therefore, my concern is that they will take these lessons and implement them in whichever reaction they will have. I'm not sure it will be tomorrow morning. Tomorrow they will celebrate Haniyeh in a big funeral in Iran, and then there will be additional mourning days in Qatar. So it may take a few days, but I have no doubt that they will both, Hezbollah and Iran, react.
Avital, thank you so much for just explaining all of these developments and what they mean.
Of course, I just hope that for once I would be able to talk about positive things and not only terror and wars.
We hope so too. We hope so too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and Am Yisrael Chai.
If you missed last week's episode, be sure to listen to my conversation with one of the fiercest advocates for Israel on social media today, Aviva Klumpus. Aviva explains why it's unthinkable to let others write a narrative about Israel that normalizes anti-Semitism. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can subscribe to People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. We'd love to hear your views and opinions or your questions. You can reach us at peopleofthepod@ajc.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tell your friends, tag us on social media with #peopleofthepod, and hop on to Apple Podcasts to rate us and write a review to help more listeners find us. Tune in next week for another episode of People of the Pod.